Welcome to this video demonstration of the National Demand and Capacity Programme's Aggregation module. This video is one of a number of resources created to support the use of demand and capacity models for elective care pathways. The full suite of tools consists of the 6 models developed by the Intensive Support Team, along with the core and high complexity models developed by the National Demand and Capacity Programme. The Aggregation module takes the outputs of these models, which are normally used to look at particular elements within a pathway, and ties them together to give a whole service pathway view. We'd recommend that you use the Aggregation module after you have completed models for each part of your pathway. This video will look at the Aggregation module, taking you through its purpose and methodology, how to populate it, and how to use its outputs. The Aggregation module is a tool that will assist you with making strategic analyses of healthcare services at a whole pathway level. It takes the outputs of a number of completed demand and capacity models, either the IST models or the core or high complexity models, and generates a service level overview of demand and capacity metrics for each part of the service. This empowers services to better appreciate the implications of patient flow through a system that cannot easily be observed within standalone demand and capacity models.
The aggregation model will help quantify some key metrics for your entire service. Firstly, the aggregation module will display the balance of required capacity versus available capacity, which will indicate whether you are able to keep pace with incoming demand. Secondly, the module will show the balance of the current waiting list versus the sustainable waiting list, indicating whether you can treat patients in a timely manner. Thirdly, the estimated activity resulting from your available capacity, what you are able to deliver and required capacity, and what needs to be done. The aggregation module takes the first 2 metrics directly from completed demand and capacity models. The third metric, the estimated activity, is based on a simple calculation which we'll look at briefly now. The expected attendances are calculated by removing from your demand the removals other than treatment and the services non-attendance, where the slot is lost and the patient is discharged rate. Demand considered non-attendances, slot lost, and discharged would be patients discharged from the service following a short notice cancellation or on the day did not attend. Generally, this depends on the service's access policy. One of the key assumptions for the aggregation module is that all the processes that are modelled will count towards activity. If you are using this tool to assist contracting, then non-contract activity will need to be removed from your modelling. It's worth noting that activity outputs can be categorized as new, follow-up appointments, or admissions, which is designed to link into activity planning. We'll see how this is done later when we look at the model. In order to use the aggregation module, you will need a pathway map and a completed demand and capacity models for each stage of the service. Let's spend some time on the pathway mapping to assist with the completion of the aggregation module. Process mapping visualizes the entire patient journey and can be a useful tool to capture the reality of the patient pathway, expose areas of duplication, and can foster discussions around what does and does not work from the patient's perspective. Comprehensive pathway mapping requires a collective, multidisciplinary approach across the service. Additional resources on mapping pathways can be found on the NHS Improvement website. At a minimum, your pathway map for demand and capacity modelling needs to include the order in which processes take place, what kind of appointments take place within these processes, for example, new, follow-up, or admission, what proportion of patients go on to the next stage, this is referred to as the percentage flow, and how much each incoming patient is worth in terms of capacity usage for the year. This is the new to follow-up ratio in most cases. In order to get the values for some of these figures, you may need to track a sample of patients through their pathways so you can quantify their behaviour. Let's examine how this might be done in practice for a part of the pathway. In order to quantify the flow of patients from a first assessment clinic to a diagnostic or follow-up clinic, we'll take a sample of patients who have attended the first assessment clinic and track them using their patient ID to see which parts of the service they subsequently went. The aggregation module will then use the flows that you have quantified as part of the pathway mapping to estimate the downstream impact of changes made earlier in a pathway. For example, if there was a waiting list backlog that needed to be cleared at the start of a pathway, what would be the expected workload for later parts of the pathway? In order to use this model, you'll need to have prepared a number of service-specific demands and capacity models. The aggregation module will accept the outputs of any IST models or the core or the high complexity model. You'll need to make sure that these models are saved to a location that your computer can access and are clearly labelled. As a general tip, it's useful to keep service-related models together in a folder and to number the models in order that they take place in the pathway.
Let's turn to the aggregation module. The data file sheet is where the initial setup of the aggregation module takes place. Like the core and high complexity models, you can specify the organisation and treatment function code of the service that you are looking at. Below this, you can specify up to 20 service components or processes as identified in our pathway map. These are the stages of your pathway for which you have completed individual demand and capacity models. In some services, it may be useful to differentiate between diagnostic activity and other types of activity. This drop-down menu will allow you to expand the type of activity linked to the outputs of the different processes in your service. This may be useful when you are reviewing a service for contracting purposes, for example. Finally, the figures extracted from the demand and capacity models you have created can be revealed. This will be useful for further automated development, but will not have an impact on the operation of the aggregation module. The table at the bottom of this sheet is where the details of the completed demand and capacity models are entered. Going from left to right, the data that should be entered in the various columns are index. This is a reference column and cannot be edited. Description, where you can enter a simple text description of the process. This will be used as a label throughout the rest of the workbook, so it's best to keep this reasonably short. File name. This should be the name of the demand and capacity model file name, including the file suffix. Path, the location that the demand and capacity model file has been stored. If this is located on your local network, then the full network path will need to be included. If you have any questions about how to obtain the full path location of your demand and capacity model, it may be worth contacting your IT department for assistance. Status. This is a reference column and cannot be edited. If this shows anything other than file loaded, then something may have gone wrong in the data extract process, and you will need to load the file. We will cover this process shortly. Model type. This should be set to the type of model that you have used in your demand and capacity analysis. The drop-down menu indicates all of the IST models, as well as the core and high complexity model. Please make sure you select the correct model type, otherwise errors may result. Pod 1, 2 and 3. These columns allow you to assign the outputs of the process to a pod, or a point of delivery. New, follow-up or subsequent, and admission. Please note that all the models will need a pod 1 to be filled in, while pod 2 and pod 3 are only needed for completed flow models. Further information on the flow model can be found on the National Demand and Capacity Programme's website. It is important that the files are uploaded in the order that they take place on your pathway map. So, you would put a first assessment clinic at the top of the list, while a day case model may be entered last. For processes that occur in parallel, a set of diagnostic tests, for example, the order will not matter. Once you have entered the details of all the models you would like to upload, pressing the Reload All button will start the data extract. This may take a while, especially for services with a large number of components. If any of the models return an error, which will be visible in the status column, then you can load an individual model using the Load button to the right of the table. When trying to diagnose an error, please check the data files table, and in particular checking that the file name and file path are completed correctly. The dependency setup sheet will allow you to set up the expected flow from one process to the next, using the values calculated for the pathway flow analysis that we discussed earlier. The source process is listed on the left, and the dependent process is where patients will transfer to. As with the previous sheet, we will go from the start of the pathway to the end, listing all the outcomes for each process before moving to the next. While you can enter the information in any order, we would recommend this or a similarly structured data entry method to help you keep track of the different flows. Going from left to right, the columns are populated as follows. The source process is the process that patients go through, such as a first outpatient's appointment. The type source values is the pod that will be used as the source activity. For the majority of models, there will only be one possible output, but if you're using a flow model, then you'll have one of three possible pods to choose from. The dependent process is the process that patients will move on to once they have been seen in the source process. The appropriate process will be based on your pathway map. The consider activity as is the pod that patients will flow to as part of their pathway. As with the source process, there is normally only one possible pod unless the dependent process is based on the flow model. The percentage flow is the proportion of patients from the source process that will become requests for the dependent process, as calculated whilst completing your pathway mapping. The conversion is the conversion applied to each patient in the dependent process, based on the new to follow-up ratio. The conversion ratio can be considered as the number of dependent appointments each patient can expect to have. For example, on average, each patient from a first outpatient appointment can expect 1.1 endoscopy appointments. The rest of the sheets in the workbook use the information you have entered to create a detailed view of the service pathway using the key demand and capacity metrics. These are the values which indicate how well your service is able to cope with demand and highlight potential problem areas for action. The first of these outputs is the DC balance sheet, which shows the balance of required capacity in the form of a coloured bar against the available capacity, the X, with a section for each process that has been uploaded. If the X is within the coloured bar, then it is likely that your available capacity is well matched to the required capacity, and therefore your waiting list size will probably be stable. The chart can be changed to show a particular process within the pathway using the drop-down menu at the top of the sheet, while a table summary is provided below the chart. Note that the summary is colour-coded to show which services may be at risk of not being able to provide enough capacity to meet demand, and the key for this can be found below the table. If you have used the flow model to analyse any part of your service, you can expand the table to show all the pod outputs using the Show, Hide, Multi-Level Processes drop-down box. The WL balance sheet shows the other main metric, the current waiting list size, the diamond, against the sustainable waiting list size, the coloured bar. If the diamond is above the bar, then there may be a backlog of patients, and patients may also be waiting longer than the desired waiting period for clinical contact. The effect downstream of clearing this backlog is quantified in the aggregate activity sheet. As with the DC balance sheet, the data series can be adjusted to view a specific process within the pathway, and the tabular view can be expanded to show multiple levels of pod if the flow model was used as part of the pathway analysis. The sense check sheet provides a quick check on the internal consistency of the data that has been entered. This sheet uses the data entered in the dependency setup sheet to calculate the expected demand for each process within the pathway, extrapolated from the first points of entry into the pathway, such as first assessment or first outpatient appointment clinics. This calculated or expected demand is compared against what was uploaded from the models, or the measured demand. If the measured demand, the X, is within 5% of the expected demand, the bar, then your demand data is behaving as expected, based on your pathway mapping. If it differs, however, this may be evidence that the figures entered in your pathway map are not accurate. There may be valid reasons for a discrepancy. For example, there may be external sources of demand, such as straight-to-test elements for diagnostics. However, it is always worth checking this before continuing. The final sheet is the aggregate activity sheet. This shows the estimated activity outturn for the service, using the calculations mentioned earlier. The key output on this page is the expected activity resulting from demand, assuming all demand that needs clinical contact is met. This is represented as a bar. Expected activity resulting from available capacity, assuming perfect delivery of capacity, regardless of demand, is represented as a dash. The module will also further divide the estimated activity from demand into recurrent demand, non-recurrent demand, and additional activity from waiting list backlog clearances. Recurrent demand is your expected regular demand, as captured in the demand and capacity models. Non-recurrent demand is the additional demand generated by the reduction required to bring the current waiting list size to within the sustainable waiting list size. The additional activity from waiting list backlog clearances resulting from the pathway flow takes both of these into account, as well as the additional clearance from any upstream pathway steps identified in the system. Finally, this division of demand activity will provide the following analysis. First, it distinguishes the activity that is likely to be consistently demanded by patients, the recurrent activity. Secondly, it highlights the additional activity generated from waiting list clearances, assuming no flow from any previous pathway steps. Finally, the module shows the additional activity on top of that, resulting from the movement of backlog clearances through the pathway. These three sets of estimated demand activity outturn can be compared against the deliverable activity based on available capacity and can be used as the basis of further discussions on how to best align these figures operationally. You can drill down further into specific processes, much like the previous sheets, using the drop-down options on the top left of the sheet. There is one additional drop-down on this sheet, which will allow you to aggregate the figures by process or by pod. This feature may be useful when planning your service with your contracts team. For more information on the work of the Demand and Capacity team, please go to our website. Your feedback is very important to us. Please contact us via our email address with any questions or comments you may have. Thank you for watching this video.